Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Regina Westcott.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What a sad state of affairs we've seen this week from the Liberals. Here we are engaging in what should be a serious conversation about a pressing issue, only to hear the members opposite say, but what about them? They did something worse. The old political tactic of whataboutism, the ultimate escape hatch for avoiding accountability. It's become the go-to response by the Liberals during the course of this debate. Let's step back and look at the big picture. A government gets caught red-handed in a scandal. It's clear, undeniable, and the public deserves an explanation. What happens next? Well, we don't get an apology or even a hint of responsibility. Instead, we get a well-rehearsed, but what about the other party? They try to change the subject to someone else's wrongdoing, as if two wrongs somehow make a right. Whataboutism is the political equivalent of the schoolyard comeback, I know you are, but what am I? How childish, Madam Speaker. This attitude of avoiding the tough questions by pointing fingers elsewhere is nothing new. It's been happening for years across all political spectrums. But under this Liberal government, it seems to have sunk to a new low. A strategy deployed to muddy the waters and confuse the public. Why talk about real problems when you can play the blame game instead? Why address policy failures when you can just drag your opponents into the mud with you? We stand here today, once again, facing this Liberal government that will do everything humanly possible to avoid transparency. The Liberal government's pattern of withholding crucial documents and hiding from parliamentary scrutiny is not just a betrayal of democracy, it's an outright assault on the accountability that every Canadian citizen deserves. The present case involving Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or the Green Slush Fund, serves as only the latest example of a long series of maneuvers by the Liberals to avoid accountability. Here we have a Speaker of the House ruling that the Liberal government violated the powers of the House by refusing to provide documents related to this fund. This blatant refusal to cooperate with Parliament represents an alarming trend of deception. What are they hiding? What could possibly be so damning in these documents that they would rather violate the very principles of parliamentary oversight than let the truth be seen? The arrogance of this behavior cannot be overstated. Time and time again, when faced with tough questions, the Liberal government shifts the goalposts, stonewalls, or when absolutely cornered, throws up their hands and gives vague, non-committal responses. They've forgotten they serve the Canadian people, not their own political interests. What makes this evasion all the more ridiculous is the government's attempts to put a green spin on it. Sure, they grossly mismanaged public funds to shovel money to their friends. Sure, they were involved in corruption, but at least it was green corruption. This seems to be their argument. At least it was some nice environmentalist who got away with the cash. The absurdity of this argument is lost on no one, yet somehow the Liberals seem to believe that this passes as an acceptable response. And yet, despite how laughable and immature the Liberals' whataboutism is, they are unrelenting in their use of it. We have heard Liberal speaker after Liberal speaker stand up this week and waste the House's time with history lessons and other distractions that have nothing to do with the issue we are dealing with here and now. Their response has turned this debate into a competition of who did worse, rather than who can do better. This attitude is not just disappointing, it's dangerous. It promotes a culture of deflection where no one is held accountable because, well, someone else did something bad too. It undermines trust in our leaders and institutions because it suggests that as long as someone else is doing worse, then nothing needs to change. What a sad state of affairs for the Liberal Party, Madam Speaker. The party that waltzed into government with fine slogans about sunny ways and running the most transparent government in history now hides and cowers behind the excuse that, well, at least the other guys were worse. What makes that attitude so much sadder, Madam Speaker, is that it's not even true. By any metric you want to choose, by taxpayers' dollars wasted, or by the length of time these schemes were running, the number of ethics violations incurred, by any metric you can come up with, the level of corruption by this Liberal government is in a shameful class all by itself. When this government first came to power, one of their slogans was, "Canada is back." A slogan that reflects the typical entitled Liberal Party attitude that the nation of Canada and the Liberal Party are the same thing, and the Liberals are Canada's natural governing party. Mr. Speaker, if you go through, Madam Speaker, if you go through life with that attitude, then it becomes easy to rationalize stealing from the public purse. Why not use the taxpayers' money for your own benefit? To put it another way, as far as the Liberals are concerned, the taxpayers' money is the Liberals' money. Nowhere has the Liberal attitude of entitlement been more obvious than in the present issue of the Liberals' Green Slush Fund. So let's take a closer look at this most recent incarnation of Liberal greed, corruption, and insider cronyism. Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC, is a program that was supposed to be about protecting our environment, fostering innovation, and creating a sustainable future. But what has it become? It has become the Liberals' Green Slush Fund. The Auditor General's report, released earlier this year, is a damning indictment of SDTC and the entire Liberal government's mismanagement of public funds. $334 million over 186 cases to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. A staggering $58 million was handed out to ineligible projects. What were these projects? Some of them didn't develop a single new technology. Others made outlandish claims about their environmental benefits that couldn't stand up to the slightest scrutiny. Yet they were funded anyway. And let's not forget, Madam Speaker, that the Auditor General looked at only a sample of SDTC transactions. A sample. She looked at roughly half of the transactions and found that 82% of them were conflicted. We can easily surmise that the remaining cases were just as conflicted and that sums of money involved were hundreds of millions of dollars more. This is about more than just paperwork errors or poor oversight. This is about a culture of corruption that has seeped into the highest levels of this Liberal government. This is about a Prime Minister who promised transparency, but instead gave us secrecy. A Prime Minister who said that his government would work for all Canadians, but instead has set up a system where only his friends and Liberal insiders get ahead. Liberal insiders at the trough. That is what this program is all about. How could this happen? How could a program designed to fund innovation and environmental protection be so utterly corrupted? Unraveling those questions starts by looking at the person at the center of this scandal, Annette Verschuren, the chair of the SDTC board, who oversaw much of this disaster. A person who voted to give millions of dollars to her own companies. Why would she not recuse herself? Someone with such a long history of corporate governance must have had at least some glancing knowledge of the concept of conflict of interest. The ethics commissioner himself has called out this blatant conflict of interest for years, but unfortunately it went unpunished. We now know that Verschuren's company and our store directly benefited from these funds. And this is not a one-off event. It's a symptom of a system that has been so utterly compromised by greed and self-interest. When whistleblowers tried to bring these issues to light, what did they get? Well, some of them got fired, some of them got silenced, and some of them got a toxic workplace environment where honesty is punished and corruption is rewarded. Madam Speaker, let's review some of the whistleblower testimony from committee. Quote, "Just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement at SDTC, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization," unquote. In other statements, the whistleblower said, quote, "The true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic systems and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. It should never have taken 2 years for the issues to reach this point, and what should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that allowed SDTC to continue wasting millions of dollars and abusing countless employees over the last year," unquote. And finally, the whistleblower went on to say, "I think that the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation being a public nightmare, and they would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with the situation like this SDTC and the public sphere," unquote. Well, isn't that the truth, Madam Speaker? Isn't that exactly what we've seen and heard from Liberal members opposite with their incessant whataboutism? One of the pieces of testimony from the Ethics Committee from last year that I found quite puzzling came from Doug McConaughey, an Assistant Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development, or ISED for short, who saw the handling of the whistleblower complaints against SDTC. In a recorded conversation with a whistleblower, Mr. McConaughey stated, quote, "There's a lot of sloppiness and laziness. There is some outright incompetence. And, you know, the situation is just kind of untenable at this point." And in the recorded conversation, he went on to say, and I think this comment coming from a senior, experienced civil servant was especially relevant. He said, quote, "It was free money. That is almost a sponsorship scandal level kind of giveaway," unquote. But then, in the committee, after the Liberal bosses had talked to him and provided him with his new talking points, Mr. McConaughey made the following statement that I found both surprising and sad. Quote, "I was too transparent, too trusting, and I deeply regret any impact this has had on the government, SDTC, and ISED," unquote. Too transparent. Too transparent. Yes, apparently by the standards set by the Liberal Party, the government should be transparent only to a point. Their attitude seems to be, well, we'll make a bit of a show of being honest and open, but let's not get carried away. Let's be clear. This is not just an accident. This is not a bureaucratic mistake. This is an apparatus of greed built to serve Liberal insiders, their friends, and their allies. And what about the real innovators? What about the hardworking Canadians who play by the rules, who try to get ahead through hard work and good ideas? They are left out in the cold, watching as Liberal friends get their snouts in the government trough. Madam Speaker, since its inception, SDTC has received $2.1 billion in federal funding. Under the present Liberal government, the most recent agreement outlined $722 million in funding through 2028. But instead of using that money to build cleaner, greener futures, they've used it to line the pockets of their wealthy friends and business associates. Madam Speaker, at the end of the day, after all of their carbon taxes and all of their anti-oil and anti-gas policies and all of their environmental rhetoric, the only thing that is greener is the wallets of their friends. Let's go over those numbers again to try to keep things in perspective. $58 million that we know about given to ineligible projects. $334 million that we know about in blatant conflicts of interests. Those are the facts, Madam Speaker. The shameful, appalling, caught red-handed, hand-in-the-cookie-jar facts. Yet, we have not even heard a single Liberal member across the aisle offer to the Canadian people anything that even remotely resembles an apology. Not so much as a syllable of accountability or regret, just an endless stream of excuses, evasions, and whataboutism. Madam Speaker, this is the very definition of Liberal insiders at the trough. This is how they operate and think. They take care of their own. They make sure that Liberals get rich while ordinary Canadians struggle to make ends meet. And then, when they get caught, what do? Almost like a reflex, they bring up one or two mistakes made by Stephen Harper from 12 or 15 years ago. Madam Speaker, Canadians deserve better. The Liberals' response has been unacceptable, especially when we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money thrown away on projects that should have never been funded in the first place. This green slush fund scandal is about more than just money. It's about integrity. It's about a Liberal government that has lost its way, that has forgotten who they work for. We need real accountability. We need a government that works for the people, not for the insiders, not for the lobbyists, and not for the rich and well-connected. The Liberals will tell you that this is all just a misunderstanding, that these issues are being fixed. But we've heard that before. We heard it after the SNC-Lavalin scandal, we heard it after the We Charity scandal, we heard it after the ArriveCan app scandal, and we are hearing it now. This is a pattern of corruption and greed, a pattern of Liberal insiders at the trough taking whatever they can get and leaving the rest of us to pay the bill. Madam Speaker, Canadians have had enough. It's time for a change. It's time for a government that puts Canadians first, that makes Canada work for people who work, a government that believes in fairness, transparency, and accountability. We cannot allow this culture of corruption to continue. We cannot allow the Liberals to keep putting their friends and insiders ahead of the Canadian people. Let's send a message to this government that enough is enough. Let's take back control of our tax dollars. Let's demand accountability. And let's make sure that the next time there's a program like SDTC, it's working for the people, not for insiders at the trough. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, putting the numerous false accusations or misinformation and the amount of rhetoric that's in that speech, whoever wrote it, I have no idea, but no doubt they'll get a gold star from the Conservative spin doctors. I can tell you that when this issue first came to being, it was the Liberal government that addressed the arm's length. Arm's length means it's not the government that runs the fund. The government provides the fund. An arm's length group administers the program. And when the government found that there were serious allegations, 2 internal audits were done. The Auditor General also has done a report on it. The Standing Committee has been looking at it to try to give the impression this is all about liberal insiders and corrupt liberals is a bunch of, and I'll let you fill in the blank, Madam Speaker. And I think it does a disservice for those individuals that would actually be listening and believing the type of things that you were saying on the record. My question is, the motion is saying that we should grab everything we have and give it directly to the RCMP. That is very much something new to the House of Commons. Because we have the power, we can do that. Just because we have the power doesn't mean we have the right to walk on the Charter of Rights of individuals. Shame on the member.
Regina Wascana.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. I didn't quite hear a question in there, so let me just say that the oldest trick in the book is to set up an arm's-length agency and appoint all of your friends and insiders to the board who all have conflicts of interest, and then that gives politicians the ability to say, well, it wasn't me, it was all of my friends whom I appointed. As for the second part of the honourable member's statement, good people cannot stand idly by and let all of this corruption and criminal activity go on. When you have honest, hard-working civil servants who come to work every day and do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and they see all of these corrupt liberals helping themselves to taxpayers' money, they cannot...
Yeah, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, he's giving the hand gesture all these corrupt liberals. I can tell the member I am not corrupt, nor do I believe any of my liberal colleagues are corrupt.
No, it's... let's start slinging from one side to the other because that doesn't arrange the situation. But absolutely, I would advise the honourable member to avoid calling the benches liberal, all of them. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I can assure the honourable member my hand gestures were not directed at him personally. I do get a bit animated with my hands sometime. But where was I? Oh, yes. So honest people can't stand by and let criminal activity happen. When there are criminal activities, the police have to be called in. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Et commentaires. L'honorable député d'Abitibi, James Nunavik-Iyo.
Madame la Présidente, on se souvient, en 2005, la vérificatrice générale a produit un rapport dévastateur intitulé « La reddition de comptes dans les fondations ». Le gouvernement y a même bonifié 9 milliards, il a transféré, c'est-à-dire 9 milliards dans 15 fondations, dont Technologie de développement durable du Canada. TTDC, là, n'est que le révélateur d'un cancer généralisé, Madame la Présidente. Le gouvernement fédéral est d'une incroyable inefficacité, excusez, j'ai de la misère à dire parce que c'est effroyable, et traite les fonds publics comme de l'argent de Monopoly. Ça n'a pas de bon sens, Madame la Présidente. Alors, si vous devenez gouvernement, vous, qu'est-ce que vous allez faire pour éviter ce stratagème et surtout d'être vigilant par rapport à ce qui s'est passé actuellement?
Rappeler l'honorable député que moi, je ne peux pas devenir gouvernement, mais l'honorable député de Regina Wascana.
Je voudrais remercier ma collègue du Bloc pour cette question et je dois dire que oui, bien sûr, c'est un grand problème que les gens de ce pays ils ont perdu la confiance en le gouvernement et en notre institution démocratique et je crois que c'est un vrai problème qu'on doit améliorer, mais la première chose à faire est à changer le gouvernement et ça c'est pourquoi on a besoin d'un nouveau gouvernement conservateur après la prochaine élection. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Questions and comments, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And there are many accusations flying across the floor, and one may forgive me that I want to not say it's necessarily an epithet, but I'm trying to figure out if Annette Verschuren, if we can find any evidence that she's in fact tied to liberals or was a liberal or is ever a liberal. I've gone through Wikipedia, I've gone through everything I can find about her. She was obviously, and I do know as a Cape Bretoner, I won't say former, once a Caper, always a Caper. that she was really highly regarded as a Cape Breton girl who was the daughter of Dutch immigrants, worked hard on a farm all her life. But I looked through her political connections. She was named by Stephen Harper to help in the Economic Advisory Council in the financial crisis of 2008. She was awarded Canadian Business Hall of Fame in 2019. She was also an advisor to Brian Mulroney. She seems to have been on all sides of the political fences, and she was also on the board of directors of Natural Resources Limited, of course, an oil sands company, which also received money from STDC. She's on the board of the Ontario Energy Agency. Clearly, she didn't understand the concept, and this is mind-boggling for someone with that kind of business career. As chair of the board of SDTC, she didn't seem to understand that she was in flagrant conflict of interest. There's no question about that. So my question, and her organization, I heard it thrown around that they got millions. As far as I can see on the record, it's unacceptable if they got a nickel while she was chair of the board, mind you, but they got about $200,000 from SDTC. My point is here, she's not without getting punished in all this. Her reputation is in tatters. Still, one wants to know more. But I don't see this as a case where a board set up under Jean Chrétien, run under Stephen Harper with the same board structure, is suddenly the entire thing is now condemned as a liberal slush fund. It certainly was mismanaged. She was chair of the board when flagrant conflict of interest occurred, but I don't see anything that ties her specifically to one party or another.
Honourable member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for her intervention, and I would say all the more reason to hand these documents over to the RCMP so they can do a thorough investigation to get to the bottom of this. But I would say that someone as experienced as this individual should have known better and should have known that there was a conflict of interest and should have recused herself from the situation. And if she didn't, there should have been the oversight in place to make sure that did indeed happen. And that is why it is so frustrating when we have a program like this that was, by all accounts, set up with good intentions many years ago to promote research and development into new technologies and environmental solutions. It is so frustrating when all of that goodwill gets thrown out the window and it turns into a slush fund for liberal insiders. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking about board members, there is one board member that received, her company, Psycho Capital, received $250 million in contracts. And there is a Liberal minister, actually the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, that was a lobbyist for them and met with the government 25 times the year before getting elected in 2019. So this is of concern to us. I wonder if the member could make a few comments on this. Great question.
The honourable member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. And the simple answer is yes. I don't understand how the present Environment Minister could have thought it was possibly acceptable, given his connections in the past to these people and these organizations, for there to be such a lack of oversight and such a high degree of complacency among the individuals involved. So again, all the more reason to hand over all the documents to the RCMP, and all the more reason for there to be a complete and thorough investigation so the people who did wrong are held account, and the people who did nothing wrong are cleared of any wrongdoing. But we cannot have that happen as long as there continues to be stonewalling and a refusal to cooperate with the RCMP. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very brief question from the honourable member for Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I agree with everything what the member from Science Gulf Island said. I just want to ask the member, is he aware that the person at the center of this issue is also a Conservative Party donor?
Member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the short answer is no. I mean, I have not looked into the past donations of these particular individuals, but I don't feel that I should have to. I feel that this House should hand the matter over to the RCMP and let them get to the bottom of it, as should have been done quite a few days ago.
Du débat, l'honorable député de